Two of my biggest interests are learning the French language and touring historical battlefields. In August of 2019, I was able to satisfy both with a language immersion homestay in northern France, right in the middle of some of the most ferocious battlefields of World War I. For a week I lived with a young couple in a small village about an hour-and-a-half drive from Paris. Eliane and Benjamin own a house with a bungalow in their backyard where I stayed. In the mornings I studied French, and in the afternoons I toured historical sites, museums, battlefields, and was totally immersed in the French culture. On Monday, after my morning French lesson, I visited the Museum of the Great War in Péronne, which is in the middle of the Somme region. Then on my way to the Thiepval Memorial, I stopped at this roadside monument to the Battle of Mouquet Farm. Here is a short excerpt from this plaque. Mouquet Farm was a central bastion in the German defensive position during the Battle of the Somme. On August 5th, the Australians were the first to attack this stronghold. The Australians proceeded to claw their way up the slopes to Mouquet Farm, each day in a nightmarish landscape deluged by artillery fire. Both sides fought to the death over small sections of trench. I think it's important to stop at these memorials to honor and remember the men who paid the ultimate price for freedom. The Thiepval Memorial is for the missing of the Battle of the Somme and bears the names of more than 72,000 men of the United Kingdom and South African forces who died in the Somme sector and have no known grave. Over 90% of those commemorated died between July and November 1916. This memorial also serves as an Anglo-French battle memorial in recognition of the joint nature of the 1916 Somme offensive. This small cemetery contains equal numbers of English and French graves. This is what they call the Lochnagar Crater. It was blown up at the start of the Battle of the Somme in World War I. They dug a tunnel and put a bunch of explosives there and blew the hell right up. Trying to give some perspective on how big this crater is. So there's the crater behind me. It's pretty interesting. They recently found a body as recent as 1988 here, kind of on the side of the crater. It was exposed, and they buried it. Anyway, it's kind of sad. The area behind me is where the Battle of the Somme took place. Now it's mainly farmlands, but I was reading in the museums that there's over 700,000 bodies buried in this whole region that they'll never find, just under the earth. So this whole part of northern France is really a mass grave. But the battle was fought here over, I believe, 4 or 5 one day, 20,000 British soldiers were killed. In fact, on the first day of the Battle of the Somme. It's pretty horrific. On Tuesday, I cut my French lessons short in order to drive 2 hours for a noon tour of the North Salient of the World War I battles in Ypres, Belgium. I visited many memorable places in this fast-paced tour. Here are a few. The Essex Farm Cemetery was established during the Second Battle of Ypres and is next to an advanced dressing station or triage near the front lines. A 15-year-old British soldier named Valentine Joe Studwick is buried here and is one of the youngest fatalities of the First World War. This is also where Lieutenant Colonel John McCray wrote the famous poem In Flanders Field. My friend Aaron told me that when I go to the Essex farm and look across the canal onto the fields of battle and read that poem, that I would cry like a baby. Our guide claimed this was World War I ordnance stuck into a lamppost. On April 22, 1915, north of the city at this spot, the Germans released a massive discharge of chlorine gas into the French and Algerian lines. This marked the first major gas attack of World War I. These pictures are of the memorials to the men who died here. This area was the scene of the Third Battle of Ypres, also known as the Battle of Passchendaele. Surrounding this cemetery are German blockhouses, which were captured by the 3rd Australian Division on October 4th, 1917, in the advance on Passchendaele. Cemetery in Passchendaele, Belgium, where they say in these fields around me, 500,000 men died total. This British cemetery, they say, has about, I think they said 35,000 in it. Maybe it's less than that. Oh, there are 35,000 names on the wall, 17,000 in the cemetery. Here it is. The Germans were up on this ridge during the Third Battle of Ypres, and the British, French, Canadian, Belgium armies came through this lower land that you're looking at. And, you know, this happened over months. But, like I said before, all of northern France is truly a graveyard. But they're British, Canadian, and Australian, New Zealand soldiers buried here. And they say that the majority of them are unknown. For example, this one, soldier of the Great War, known unto God. Before I go much further, I'd just like to mention it's very emotional to tour these World War I battlefields. While making these videos, I feel that same emotion. It's incomprehensible to me to know the horrific conditions these men went through. We stopped at the Hill 62 Sanctuary Wood Museum, which has original British trenches from World War I. Right in front of me is a trench, Allied trench from World War I. I'm about to go in. The corrugated metal was not there, and it was deeper, but this is an actual trench. If they didn't put the corrugated metal in there, it would have fallen in by now. But this is an actual Allied trench. They made them zigzag, so if the Germans got in a trench, it would be harder to fight their way through, and if a bomb went off in here, it would be deflected by the zigzags instead of just like wiping out a whole straight line of soldiers. But I am in Flanders Field, Belgium, Belgique. Please see the link in the description below for extended footage of my walk through the trenches. The Menin Gate Memorial is dedicated to the British soldiers who were killed in the Ypres salient of World War I and whose graves are unknown. Following the memorial's opening in 1927, the citizens of Ypres wanted to express their gratitude towards those who had given their lives for Belgium's freedom. Every evening at 2000, buglers from the Last Post Association close the road which passes under the memorial and sound the last post. Below I have linked to a video of the ceremony. On Wednesday, after my morning French language lesson, Eliane took me to her mother and grandmother's house for lunch and French conversation. During World War II, German officers commandeered and occupied this beautiful home, and later, the Americans stayed here. Lunch was so delicious that I did not want to leave that table, ever. Next, we visited the Glade of the Armistice, which is a French National War memorial in the forest near the city of Compiègne. This is the location where, in a railroad car, the Germans and the Allies signed the Armistice of 11 November 1918 that ended World War I. At the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month of 1918, the Great War ended. Fighting continued right up until the 11 o'clock stop time, with 2,738 men dying on the last day of the war. During World War II, Adolf Hitler chose this exact spot for the French and Germans to sign the Armistice of 22 June 1940, after Germany won the Battle of France. Hitler used this location as a supreme moment of revenge of Germany over France for the World War I armistice. 3 days later, the armistice site and railroad car was demolished by the Germans on Hitler's orders. After the war, the site and memorials were restored by German prisoner of war labor. The Glade carries this inscription, I quote, "Here, on the 11th of November 1918, succumbed the criminal pride of the German Reich, vanquished by the free peoples which it tried to enslave." Again, on Thursday, after my French lesson and another fantastic lunch, I drove to the city of Elbert. Elbert was originally founded as a Roman outpost in about 54 BC. On the 15th of January 1915, during World War I, the statue of Mary and the infant Jesus, which sits on top of the Basilica of Notre-Dame de Brebières, was hit by a shell and slumped to a near horizontal position, where it remained until 1918 when the tower was destroyed. A superstition grew up among the soldiers that the war would end only when the statue fell. After the war, the basilica was rebuilt in the style of the original building, and a replica statue was recast. In Elbert, I visited the Somme 1916 Trench Museum. The museum is in the old crypts of Albert, which date back to the 12th century and show scenes of trench life, original uniforms, and other items which were rescued from the fields. The crypt is 10 meters underground and over 230 meters long and has a cool reenactment of the trenches. The exit from the museum crypts is on the other side of the city, close to a beautiful park. All of the museums I have visited in France are extremely well done, and this museum was no exception. On Friday afternoon, we went on an excursion to the historical city of Compiègne, and our first stop was the Château de Compiègne, which originally was a royal residence built for Louis XV and restored by Napoleon. Today the castle holds 3 museums: the Royal Apartments, the Museum of the Second Empire, and the National Car Museum. Joan of Arc came through this entrance to take communion at the Église, or Church, of Saint-Jacques in Compiègne shortly before her capture in 1430. The Église Saint-Jacques was built starting in 1235 and took almost 400 years to complete. This is the relic of the Veil of the Virgin donated by Charles the Bald in 876 AD. There are many relics held here, including Saint Victoria, Saint Ursula, and a nail said to be from the original cross. This tower has a very long history, and part of it involves Joan of Arc. I will read a small excerpt of the inscription on this plaque. I quote, "It is also called Tower of Joan of Arc, in homage to the heroine who crossed the old bridge before being captured on the other side of the river on 23 May 1430. A captain of the city was able to observe this fatal skirmish from the tower's upper platform." The siege of Compiègne was Joan of Arc's final military action. She was captured by the Burgundians and sold to the English, who sentenced her to be burned at the stake. On Friday evening, we went to Eliane and Benjamin's favorite restaurant, which is now my favorite. I posted a link to my immersion homestay review on Eliane's webpage in the video description below. However, I would say that my French language skills improved dramatically throughout the week. And I'm also very happy to say that Eliane is an expert in World War I history. Many of the sites I visited were based on her recommendations. For Eliane and Benjamin, merci pour cette très bonne semaine. And a very sweet homestay.